Hello and welcome back, everyone. I am your host, James Marcuzzo. It is week 7 of the KSS, and we're going to talk about Federalist Paper 51. This very much starts out similar to Federalist Paper 47, where they talk about the separation of the branches of government: executive, judiciary, legislature. But they talk more specifically about why they need to keep them separate and different ways they can balance them off of one another. For example, make sure they're paid separately, right? If someone pays you, they certainly have influence on what you do and how you behave. So we don't want that. Make sure that they're chosen separately. Now, ideally, we'd like to say that the citizens simply choose the president, choose all the legislators, choose the senators, and choose the judges. Well, the problem is that's actually not necessarily the best idea, and the same demagogic rhetoric can be used. We don't want that. A president has a role to play. They're not as powerful as the legislature, right, for one example, but they're powerful. And so presidents pander to the electorate, and the electorate kind of pushes the electors to, right, because it's not a one-for-one vote for president, remember. Now, the legislature and the senators, they're elected differently initially. The congressmen and women were elected by popular vote, and still are. But the senators were not. They were elected from within the state legislatures of the 50 states, or however many there were at the time. Because the founding fathers wanted different interests represented, and they didn't want too much overlap and a consolidation of power. That's why they split the House and the Senate. Instead of having just one legislature, it's the upper and lower house, and they have different functions. Presidency, for example, got the power of veto over the legislature to basically give the executive more clout, more power, because otherwise the legislature is by far the most powerful branch in the government, and it ought to be because it's the one that is most closely elected by us, the people. He talks a little bit about there's some elitist notions in the founding of our country. For example, the judges are basically where all the intelligence is, right, in our federal government. The legal interpretation. That takes real brain power. And so do we want the average citizen electing Supreme Court justices? I don't think so. No, I think they made the right call. Now the president, who eventually kind of comes from the people, is promoted through the people, and the House and the Senate that are coming up representing the people, they make the decision on the judges. Is that appropriate? I think so. You might disagree. Now, on the second page, we have a discussion about the separation between state and federal. Now, we've been talking about the three branches of government, but federalism is the idea that we have entirely separate governments. We have a government in each state that is an autonomous, separately functioning government, controlling and running its own affairs within the state. Nebraska is where I live. There's the governor, the executive, the legislature, the state legislature in Nebraska. It's called unicameral because we don't actually have the left and the right. It's just the one body, and there is no political affiliation, although there really is. We know there is. And then the state judiciary. And then on the federal level, of course, there's actually the president and the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court. And so that's just one more way to separate the powers out to ensure that they have to fight against each other and not trample on our rights, which I'm a huge fan of. And then finally, they talk about the problem of faction, which we might remember from Fed 10. And they talk about creating a voice separate from the public. Now, the problem they're really addressing here is that we don't want a majority trampling on the rights of the minority. Now, one way to address this is to have something like a sovereign or a hereditary monarchy, some group that exists in society that is not elected but has this separate interest. Well, that's just as likely to be terrible as fine, and more likely to be terrible as we've seen throughout history. So that's out the window. And in reality, we actually want to focus on pluralism. The idea, and this is the Republican principle, there are so many of us and so many different interests and affiliations and factions within society, and the bigger the better, because then we're all pushing against each other, and it is highly unlikely that any one majority will be able to dominate all the rest. And that's 51. So we'll talk again soon. Contact me with any questions.